Today our topic is tissues. There are four main tissue types that we're going to consider: epithelial tissue, connective tissue, muscle tissue and nervous tissue, and we deal with those in turn. Epithelial tissue is located throughout the body and has a great variety of functions. First of all, it covers the body, as in our skin. It also lines the organs that connect to the outside, such as the respiratory tract, the gastrointestinal tract and the urinary system. And it's also glandular tissue, which is located throughout the body. Its functions are to protect, as in the skin. So in that case it has a number of layers. We'll talk about that in a moment. Absorption, an example of that is absorption of nutrients in the gastrointestinal tract. Filtration, where it filters fluids, as occurs in the kidney. And secretion by glandular tissue of hormones or mucus and sweat and so on. So these are all epithelial tissues and with a great variety of functions. So this is showing the basic structure of epithelial tissue. At the top we've got a simple structure made up of a single layer of cells with an apical surface, which is the one that's opening to an outside area, and then a basal surface which is connected to the underlying tissues, and in there is usually a basement membrane. A more complicated structure is this stratified one, and but it's the same basic idea, that you've got an apical surface and a basement membrane, but the cells are arranged in a number of layers. And in both cases they can have different forms, and the cells can have different forms, and we'll look at those in a moment. So this is an example of a different form. These are columnar cells, and they're in the small intestine. Their primary purpose is absorption, and you can see the pink layer on the top. These are microvilli, small projections from the cell wall, which greatly expand the surface area of the cell for absorption of nutrients. You see they have a nucleus, and at the base they have a basement membrane, and then underlying connective tissue where the blood supply is. And there's also in this tissue a goblet cell, which is used for producing mucus. This is another kind of epithelial tissue. But the cells in this case are cuboidal in shape, and they're in kidney tubules and they have this filtration process that I talked about. The center space is where the urine is collected and taken down to the bladder. You'll notice that there's a basement membrane and also surrounding connective tissue, in which it's fibrous tissue and also blood vessels. This is another form called pseudo-stratified. The cells look as if they're stratified, but they're not. It's just by the single layer of cells from bottom to top. It's just the way they fit together. You'll notice at the top are cilia. These are used for moving mucus and foreign material up the trachea, which is where this tissue is taken from. But it's also, this type of tissue also occurs in the nasal pharynx, and the cilia move material backwards into the pharyngeal area. Now, these cells are simple squamous epithelial cells, one layer thick on a basement membrane. They're surrounding what's called alveoli, which are the air sacs in the lungs. And it's at these cells that respiration takes place, exchange of gases between the air in the lungs with capillaries that are surrounding the alveoli. This is an example of where epithelial tissue is designed to protect. This is stratified squamous epithelium of the esophagus. So you've got a basement membrane over connective tissue. From there, cells divide and they are progressively moved up to the top and replaced as the wear from passing food takes place. This is another kind of epithelial tissue. This is transitional epithelium in the bladder. And these cells, first of all, are leak-proof for obvious reasons. So they'll have the connections which you learned about when you're discussing cells. But these also stretch, so as the bladder fills, the cells are able to stretch without leaking. Now, glandular epithelial tissue, there's two main kinds of glands. There's the endocrine gland and the exocrine gland. Now, the endocrine gland produce hormones which go directly into blood vessels that surround the gland cells, whereas an exocrine gland has ducts and their secretions go through those ducts to an epithelial surface. So an example of that is in the pancreas, for example, where digestive enzymes are produced in the pancreas and then transported through ducts to the small intestine, but also includes sweat and oil glands. Now, this is an example of an exocrine gland. The arrow is pointing to the duct where the secretion is taken away. The cells are cuboidal, as you see. They're sitting on that pink basement membrane. Their cells are against that membrane. The nuclei are against that membrane as well. Now, an endocrine gland has no ducts. As I said, it secretes directly into the blood supply. The gaps that you see here are artifacts from the preparation of the specimen, so you don't get distracted by those. The nuclei are the glandular cells, and the arrow is pointing to the blood vessels that are surrounding the glandular tissues. The next kind of tissue is connective tissue. It's everywhere in the body, and it has these functions, binding body tissues together and body organs. It provides support to the body, as in the skeleton and in joints and so on, and it provides protection. So let's look at the different kinds. There's bone, hyaline cartilage, as in the larynx, elastic cartilage, as in the ear, fibrocartilage, as in the discs between the vertebrae, dense connective tissue in tendons and ligaments, loose connective tissue, and there are three kinds: areola, adipose, and reticular. And then the final one is blood. Now, all connective tissues have cells located in a matrix. In the case of blood, the matrix is fluid, and the cells are the blood cells. Now, this is showing you bone. That's the osteocyte, which is the cell. in bone, and it's surrounded by a matrix in what's called a Haversian system, Haversian. Bone is not fixed in its structure, it's very mobile. Calcium and phosphorus are stored and mobilized very rapidly from bone, and of course at the bone ends in the marrow you get production of the cells in the blood. So it's a very active organ, even though it looks solid. Cartilage is made up of a matrix, that pink material, sort of featureless material, and then you can see the chondrocytes, which are the cartilage cells. The fibrocartilage is made up of fibrous tissue, which you can see there, and you've got chondrocytes and also fibroblasts. So there's the two types of cells in there. And it's very strong but elastic, which it needs to be between the vertebrae. Elastic cartilage, with elastic tissue which is stained black there, so that's part of the matrix, and you can see the chondrocyte cells. A dense connective tissue, this is an example of a ligament or a tendon, and you'll notice the very poor blood supply as pointed out here. This is slow healing tissue. This is areolar tissue, which is used to connect body organs together. The arrows are pointing to fibroblasts, collagen fibers, and then to reticular fibers. There's a good blood supply. It's quite movable, so it holds body organs together, particularly in the abdominal cavity and in the thoracic cavity. This is showing you the spleen with its lymphoid tissue and artery, and then the reticular fibers, which are stained in black, and they provide the internal supporting structure of the spleen. Adipose tissue, fat cells, and the nucleus is pushed to the side of the cell, as you can see there. And then finally we've got blood with erythrocytes, which don't have any nucleus. And there's a couple of white cells here, an eosinophil and a basophil. Now we go on to muscle tissue, made up of three kinds: skeletal, cardiac, and smooth muscle. Now, skeletal muscle has long elongated cells which are multinucleate, a number of nuclei in them, and you can see the striations in the cells. The skeletal muscle is under voluntary control. We can tell it what to do. However, this is not the case with the other two cell types. Cardiac cells, again, are elongated. They've got a single nucleus. It's showing you in the slide on the right the intercalated disc, which is through which nervous impulses are passed. And we'll talk about that when we come to the cardiovascular system. It's not under voluntary control, and that's the same for smooth muscle, which is single cell, elongated, and with one nucleus. And nervous tissue is in the brain and spinal cord and nerves. It's made up of the active nerve cells, which are called neurons, and these have processes through which nerve impulses are transmitted, and another word for those is dendrites. You'll also see there that there are supporting cells, for the neurons, and they're called glial cells, neuroglial cells, GLIAL. Now, the final topic in this video is wound healing, and those are the stages. So if we go on to the next slide, there's some images that we can look at. So looking at the left one, we've got the layers of the skin, the epidermis, which is the external layer, the dermis, which is the layer immediately underneath, and then the connective tissue with blood vessels in it. So we've got a cut, and the first stage is clotting, and we talk more about clotting later on in this course. So the wound is sealed off by a scab. But the damaged tissues release chemicals which activate the capillaries, and you get rapid growth of a capillary network, which forms into what's called granulation tissue, which is primarily capillaries. You also get activated white cells, which can be neutrophils or lymphocytes. And in the next center image, you can see you've got one of those, a macrophage, which is developed. This is clean-up cells. They clean up dead tissue. And then you've got neutrophils and lymphocytes, which engulf bacteria. In the center, you've got the granulation tissue, which is restoring the blood vessel supply, and above that you've got the scab. Now, if you remove the scab, healing is not complete. You'll start bleeding from that granulation tissue because it's very vascular. Then in the right hand, you see with the fibrous tissue that's been developed by fibroblasts, it starts to pull the wound edges together and leaves you with a scar tissue. That's particularly if the wound is wide and hasn't been pulled together by sutures. The purpose of suturing is to narrow that gap so that healing is more rapid. The epithelial tissue doesn't have so far to move to cover the area, and you reduce the amount of scar tissue that's formed. Okay, so that's the end of this video.